Welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the match preview with me, Andrew Musgrove, and John Gibson. As we can look ahead to Newcastle's visit to Marseille in the Champions League. It's going to be a fiery atmosphere, but hopefully Newcastle can continue their great form in Europe's elite competition and take a step closer to the next phase. John, welcome back to the podcast. I imagine, like me, you're still flying high after Saturday evening and Newcastle's victory over Manchester City.
Yes, it might be miserable outside and dull and gloomy, but the sun's shining in every Geordie heart. It was quite phenomenal. I mean, so many of us were expecting the worst, and what we got was literally the best.
Yep, certainly so. And on the Monday show, I've issued my apology to Eddie Howe. Hopefully, he accepts it. A total different game on Tuesday evening over in Marseille. As I said then in the introduction, the first thing I think we should focus on is the atmosphere that Newcastle United will find themselves in. We talk about St James's Park, John, as being this cauldron of fire, and we have experienced so many fantastic nights under the lights at St James's Park. We think Barcelona. Some might even point to the great atmosphere that was there on Saturday. But this is something else, isn't it? I mean, the reputation of Marseille at home is known around the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was over there in the late 90s at the World Cup. It was a riot for 3 days before England played. And when Chris Waddle was there, he's regaled me with so many stories when Chris played for Marseille, and it was in the hugely successful Marseille side that won the league title and reached the European Cup final. Chris was in that side, and it was revered and still is revered to this day by the Marseille fans. But they are phenomenally ferocious and behind that team and create an intimidating atmosphere as well as a wonderful atmosphere. So, yes, it's walking into a cauldron without a shadow of doubt.
Now, the club put out some advice last week for fans who were going to this game, and lots of advice, it's kind of restrictions, really, for want of a better phrase. And, you know, to get to the stadium, there's a few checkpoints, and you'll have your match day ticket checked at the metro station, but there's only one stop you can get onto, and you've got to be there at a certain time. You know, there's a lot of instructions to follow. And basically, you know, it's about keeping safe out there. Do you think the fact that maybe the Newcastle fans lucky enough to be there aren't quite allowed to enjoy themselves in the same freedoms that they will next month in Leverkusen or whichever German city they're going to be visiting prior to that, and in other away days that they've had in Europe? Does that impact the atmosphere slightly from a Newcastle point of view, do you think? Or does it just give it a whole another experience to get on board with?
I think once you're in the ground itself, it can produce a little bit of an irritation in getting to the ground. It can be dangerous. As I say, I've been there. I was there with England, and there was 3 days of riots before we start playing. I mean, and that atmosphere in the city itself was frightening. But the atmosphere within the stadium, I think, will be terrific. Yes, it will be hostile towards the Newcastle players, etc., but it rather lends itself to the occasion once you're in the stadium. The secret is to keep out of trouble outside the stadium, where it's easier to find trouble than it is when you're in the ground in your own little compartment. But you know, it's a place you want to see. You want to see the passion. Yeah, really, it was the best supported club in the French league, because Paris Saint-Germain were a bit like are a bit like the Manchester United crowd, you know, the prawn sandwich brigade, whereas Marseille is a footballing crowd. And if you're lucky enough to play for Marseille, like Chris Waddle, then you're set up for life. I mean, I could go with Chris to Marseille now, and I wouldn't have to buy a drink, never mind him, because if you're with Waddle, to this day, he is still their legendary superstar. And you realize what a good player Chris was when you see the sort of reaction he gets from the fans out there to this very day. So there's a beloved Geordie in an ex-Newcastle United player that's absolutely adored out there.
Yeah, great memories that Chris left them. And yeah, you know, a very passionate fan base. And then you've got the ultras, which take it up to a whole another level. If you are out there in Marseille, do stay safe and make sure that you get to enjoy the game. We're talking about the atmosphere, John. I guess that's the first real challenge when it comes to the players, isn't it? We talk good Tonali and how good Bruno are, but the first big obstacle to overcome is dealing with that atmosphere and that ferocity that will come with playing at Marseille.
Of course, yes, of course. But I mean, that's part of European competition. It's going and enjoying all the different cultures and going into bear pits. It's certainly going to be a little different to the last away game we played in the Champions League at Union. I think it's going to be a slightly different test to what we had in Belgium. And that's before we've kicked off even. Without a shadow of doubt. But that is part of what Europe's about, and we've had it traditionally down the years with Newcastle in Europe. I mean, I remember going to Roma, an Anglo-Italian, which is nothing like the Champions League, and we beat Roma in Rome, and there was a riot. Their fans rioted at them losing, and our bus was pelted, their bus was pelted, etc., etc. Crikey, I mean, in the Fairs Cup, we just went up the road to Glasgow Rangers and played in front of 70,000 and got a draw, and then the Rangers fans rioted at St James's Park. So there are nights where you're taking on the fans and the opposing fans on the terraces as well as the team. But that, as long as it's within the bounds of respectability and safety, that's the main thing. Even with the Rangers' alleged riot at St James's Park in the semi-final of the Fairs Cup, you didn't feel there was great danger within the stadium. Not like when I went to Dublin with England to play the Republic of Ireland, and the game was called off after 13 minutes. So there are atmospheres that you've got to face. Hopefully this atmosphere will just be the sort of atmosphere we love, which is absolute passion from the Marseille fans for Marseille, and equally our passion for our boys. And it's a one-off game. They're not two-legged, so there's never sort of bad blood to be carried on for a second game or whatever. As long as I don't mind the passion. I love the passion, and I love the electric atmosphere, as long as it doesn't spill over to be anything different. But let's not overhype this to be that at the moment, because that would be unfair on everyone. Let's not invite danger. Let's hope everything's good. But the players will face an intimidating crowd. But I mean, we always talk about let's make St James's Park intimidating, not just in the Champions League, but in the Premier League. And Eddie calls for that to help us to get results. And that's part of football, and that's part of football education. And that's to be enjoyed as long as it's within the bounds of respectability.
Oh yeah, it'll be some experience for both the travelling fans and Newcastle United stars, and hopefully they can kind of use it as a little bit of motivation. And I'm sure they've all played in big arenas in previous seasons, that they'll be right at home here and won't be they won't be fearing it, and they'll make the most of it. I mean, I've got to say, John, the amount of riots that you've witnessed in your time as a reporter covering Newcastle United, people are going to be thinking that it's something to do with you.
Well, yeah, I wondered if I was a common denominator somewhere along the line, but and I can add a few riots so in the World Cup as well over many years. But and of course, if you go back far enough, Andrew, football used to be like that, didn't it? You took the 80s and the old First Division, and we were horrendous with fighting crowds everywhere you went. But it's passion that boils over. We don't want that to happen. We want the game to be laced with passion, but we don't want anything to boil over. And there's nothing to fear. I mean, with Marseille, they're flying in the domestic league. They're up at the top with Paris Saint-Germain, setting the pace, flying like Billy O. But in the Champions League itself, they've only won one and lost three. So, and while they won at home convincingly 4-0 to Ajax, Ajax are so poor now, it's untrue. And the last time they played in the Champions League was at home to Atalanta, and they lost 1-0. So, it's let's not get carried away by the passion. Let's not get carried away by where they are in the French league. Let's remember that we have only lost 1 out of 4 in the Champions League. They've only won 1 out of 4.
Yeah, it's kind of roles reversed, isn't it? Because their domestic campaign, as you say, is going swimmingly well. They're second, just beaten Nice 5-1. They've won the last 3, unbeaten in the league at home, and yet their Champions League form is absolutely dire. And it is very much roles reversed when it comes to the two teams and how they're faring in the European competition. So, I mean, in many ways, John, do you look at Marseille's form in the Champions League and separate it from their form in the league? Because I'm just trying to work out what to expect. I mean, if you say they've just beaten Nice 5-1, second in the league, some of our listeners and viewers will be sitting here thinking, this is going to be a real test. But then you look at their actual results in the Champions League and you go, really? Newcastle United, who are doing better in that competition, they should be okay here. It's a difficult one to predict.
Well, they should be okay because it's all respective, isn't it, Andrew? It's what league you're in. Barcelona or Barcelona, and they came here and they took us up. But Union were flying in the Belgium league at the top, unbeaten, etc., etc. But the Belgian league, I said on here, didn't I, before on the podcast before we went there, that's the Belgian league. It's not the Premier League. There's a huge difference. And I think Bilbao and Benfica showed that. And let's be truthful, the French league isn't La Liga, the Bundesliga, the Premier League, or even Serie A in Italy, which aren't what they used to be in the 70s. But, they're going well in the French league, but the French league isn't great. So, there's nothing, if you look on pure ability, there's nothing to be scared of. You're not going to tell me Marseille are as good or better than Manchester City. No chance.
No, not at all. I guess it's just how Newcastle, like we say, handle that atmosphere and I guess the prestige of going into that Champions League and maybe the expectation to a degree as well. Because, we're sitting here and we're saying, this should be okay. I mean, on one hand, you can't underestimate Marseille despite the form in the Champions League. And then the other side of that is, Newcastle United have just beaten Man City 2-1 and deservedly so. So yeah, Marseille are not better than Man City. So
I know they're not as good.
Yeah,
they're as good as Man City.
Will have risen somewhat. So it's going to be interesting how they handle all of that. I mean, look, Marseille have some very good individual players. I mean, Gomez is a fantastic player. You've got Mason Greenwood, who's banging in the goals in Ligue 1 as well. So it is going to be a challenge to get the better of them. But as we saw on Saturday, if everyone's on form, if everything's clicked for them, Newcastle are a very, very good side.
Yeah, I mean, we're saying, Andrew, that, how do you sum up Marseille? You look at the Champions League results, not great. You look at the league results, great. You know what? How do you sum up Newcastle? That's my biggest worry. We beat Man City. This is a seesaw season. We're back up on the top, aren't we? We're on the pogo stick again. We're climbing towards heaven. You look what Newcastle side is going to turn up in Marseille, hopefully, because it's a Champions League, it's going to be the good side. But, what concerns me is not Marseille. What concerns me is Newcastle United. Are we going to see Newcastle United that played against Man City? Or we're going to see Newcastle United that played at Brentford and played at West Ham? There's more of a confusion about which Newcastle United we're going to see than which Marseille we're going to see. And they will be confused to wonder what Newcastle United side is going to turn up.
A game of total confusion. It is a flip of a coin for both sides in terms of what to expect. The players have arrived in France. They flew out on Monday morning and the club have put out pictures of the squad travelling. Anthony Gordon is one of those who has travelled. He wasn't involved in that win over Man City on Saturday. I'm surprised to see that a lot of people actually on social media, John, have said they expect Gordon and Elanga to start on the wings. Whereas if you're asking me for my team, if everyone's fit and ready to go, I wouldn't be changing the starting 11 whatsoever.
Oh, I would start with the same starting 11 that played against Manchester City, with the only proviso being what's in the legs of some of them, because physically and mentally we give so much to that game, Manchester City, that the tiredness must be in some legs, and also the tiredness must be in some brains, because it was some superhuman effort that was made. Now, what's left? For example, how much is in the legs of our two wonderful young fullbacks, Livramento and Hall, who I thought were sensational against City and were the platform for what we produced, because offensively they supported the two wingers, Murphy and Bonds, so well, getting beyond them on runs, so well they supported them, which give us a totally different dimension, because Trippier and Byrne weren't able to do that at fullback. They weren't as good as Livramento and Hall at going forward. Can they produce it again? And I mean, physically, no, on ability, of course they can. But I meant in the legs. This was their first starts, the two of them, for Youngs, for Newcastle. And then can they produce it again at Everton? And if you are Eddie Howe and you've got two fullbacks, I'm just taking these two as an example, and they've played so sensationally against City, and they helped change the course of the game against City. Do you think you can get 3 games out of them in a week? Because you would start them 4-3 because they're different class. But can they start at Marseille and at Everton? And if not, which game do you prioritise for your fullbacks? Which game is more important, Marseille or Everton? It's fascinating. It's up to Eddie to decide that. But that's one of the things. I don't know why you would start Elanga out there. I really don't know why you would start Elanga. I mean, you might want to, this is theory in Eddie's head, you might want to start Gordon because you think it's his competition. I mean, in 19 Premier League games, he hasn't scored a goal or made an assist. And the guy that played in his position on Saturday, Harvey Barnes, was the match winner. So you might say Gordon, but you might play Gordon because in the Champions League, he looks a different player. That is both a compliment and an insult, by the way, because why is he not like that in the Premier League? But you may want a case for that. But in that case, there's a case for saying play Bonds at outside right, which is what he's done before because he's right-footed. But I would play Bonds or Murphy at outside right ahead of Elanga. In fact, as you said, if everybody was fitting up to it, I would play an unchanged team. But the spreading the load thing and how much can you get out your two fullbacks 3 times in a week? That's the problem that only Eddie can answer.
Yeah, and obviously Lewis Hall went off with what we think was just cramp.
Just cramp, yeah.
But it is that balance, isn't it? You know, the way they get fitter, the way they get up to speed is by playing more minutes and more minutes. But if they're already a little bit knackered ahead of this game, you know, do you burn them out ahead of the game against Everton? And the priority question is absolutely fascinating, John, because people will look at Newcastle's position in the Champions League, 9 points. You would say one more win would probably be enough to get them over the line. So do you go for it here, or do you aim for the Bayer Leverkusen match next month?
And you've got a home one that you can win against Eindhoven, haven't you?
Yeah, but you'd want that probably done and dusted, I would say, before. That's the last one, isn't it? That's the one in January.
No, second last. PSG away is the last one, isn't it?
So you'd probably want it sewn up before, the wrap up for Christmas. But then Newcastle are, 14th, 15th in the Premier League. And
I was going to say, which is the most important game? I'm not going to answer. I'm just saying this is what's got to be. What's the most important game this week? Is it Marseille or is it Everton? And the obvious answer is that they're both important. But I meant in terms of the fullbacks. As far as the rest of the team's concerned, both are important and ought to be able to play. The rest of the team ought to be able to play 3 matches in a week. Perfectly all right. It's whether you can get 3 matches in a week out your 2 fullbacks.
Yeah, I guess the dilemma's even tougher because Kieran Trippier isn't going to be involved. He probably isn't even going to be involved against Everton. Emil Kraft wasn't in the squad against Man City, and you would think that would have to be down to injury because there isn't another fullback. Now Dan Burn does return; he is available to be picked for Tuesday evening. And it probably wouldn't surprise that many people if indeed Dan Burn did start ahead of Lewis Hall, and then Lewis Hall is kept for the game against Everton. It wouldn't please a lot of people, but I could actually see that happening. And if we're talking about priorities, and I'll give you my answer, John, I think the Premier League has to be the priority. It's great to go up as far as you can in this competition, and we're in a great position in this Champions League first stage, but you're not going to win the Champions League. I know you get money for going forward, and of course you want to go as far as you can, but the bottom line is Newcastle United, if they're going to keep their stars and they're going to sign some more next summer, they need top four football, and time is not on their side. Games are not on their side. They need to build on that Man City victory and make sure they win against Everton. Of course, we'll speak about that on Thursday. But for me, I wouldn't be against Dan Burn coming back in at left back if it means Lewis Hall is fitter and ready to go on Sunday. And I know that's a sacrifice not everybody wants to make and see, but it's not like Lewis Hall is match fit at this point in time.
No, that's the problem I was highlighting. The tragedy is that, bless him, the thoughts of seeing Dan Burn at left back again gives me nightmares. We can get away with it in a defensive game, perhaps away from home, because he gives extra height and set pieces, etc., etc., etc. But watching Lewis Hall play left back on Saturday off make you realise Dan Burn's not left back, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And like I say, it would be through gritted teeth that I make that decision. But I think
I can see the manager making that decision, because what alternative, as you say, if Trips is out of it, what alternatives are there at fullback to the two lads? And there you go for, well, first things first, we'll play the next game and then see where we are. But you think Trips will miss both?
I think there's a chance he might do. He's definitely going to miss Tuesday. And I've been wrong before, so I might be wrong again. But no. I could see him missing the next two, and it makes Eddie Howe's decision on both fullbacks a lot tougher, because he hasn't, at this moment in time, got the backup to the two men who've just come back from long-term injuries, and it's a horrible predicament to be in. And yeah, of course you want Lewis Hall to play every single game possible, but after, I think it was 70 minutes for England in the 21s and another half an hour, and then 70 minutes against Man City where he was up and down that pitch and was absolutely superb. I think you have to think beyond Tuesday night, and Eddie Howe will be diplomatic in his answer as always and say the next, the important game is the next game, and I'm not thinking about Everton, but he has to. There will be some thought about thinking about Everton, because you don't want to burn Lewis Hall out on Tuesday. You would say it's against Mason Greenwood, who's got pace to burn. That's going to be a difficult challenge. It all goes back to priority, and everyone will have their own priority. But I think it would be a tough ask of Lewis Hall to essentially play 5 games, in quick succession, because of the 2 he played for England as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting team selection. I think the rest of the team picks itself, unless again you want to spread the load, and if you do, possibly the wide position with Gordon, do you utilise him or not? It would be, you could never drop Harvey Barnes. You could rest him forever. You never drop him after what he just did in the last game. But it was nice to see so many things come to fruition against Manchester City, but you need them to do it away from home now. Tonali was back to his best. Bruno's just made for those sort of games, and we got support around Voldemade, both from midfield from Bruno and Tonali, who was released in a little tactical twist to allow him to go up front, and of course Harvey Barnes come in and he scored 6 goals now, the same as Voldemade in all competitions. So he's lending support, and better support in terms of goals than Anthony Gordon's doing on the wing. But the team selection is going to be interesting. But it does, whatever the team selection is, it doesn't change the fact it's Marseille away and what to face, etc., etc. They've got Aubameyang centre forward. Remember him from the Arsenal days, but he's 36 now, for goodness sake. He's there He's their Callum Wilson, although he did all right at the weekend down at Bournemouth. But and Mason Greenwood is their English hero that plays out wide and scores goals. But we've got to keep Greenwood quiet.
Yeah, and that will be the challenge. And you suspect he'll be on the right hand side. So Dan Burn might be the man if indeed he does start to take him on, which, with pace, that's going to be a very, very difficult challenge. But whoever goes up against Greenwood's going to find it extremely difficult to stop him. But we've shown, or Dan Burn, Lewis Hall have shown that they can pocket the very, very best. And I agree with you. I think the rest of the team picks itself. Maybe, there's a shout for maybe Botman coming in back in for Fabian Schär, but I thought Schär did so well that there's no reason to.
I thought Schär was terrific.
Yeah, no reason to rip up that partnership between him and Chow. Like I say, the only real fear is the fitness in both Tino and Lewis Hall. I think an unpopular decision will have to be made. I think you keep the midfield three, because I think, again, this is a match where you need Joe Linton and that physicality in the middle. The two midfielders speak for themselves. The wings, I mean, Harvey Barnes, after his heroics, he's got to still be in the side. Maybe the one thing that might creep into the mind of Eddie Howe, and it might be the fact that Gordon doesn't turn up at Goodison Park. Not Goodison, but he never turned up at Goodison Park and whatever.
Yes.
Hill Dixon.
But he doesn't, though, does he? He doesn't turn up at Everton. He doesn't turn up at Everton, no.
So that might creep in.
You could play Gordon. This is a wild card, but you could play Gordon at outside left and Harvey Barnes at outside right.
You could do, but again, Murphy.
He's done that once. Remember?
Yeah, and he came. There was a change in the midway through a game where he did it. And,
he changed it in the middle of a game, but then he started Barnes out right in a game.
Yeah. But I mean, Murphy, the balls into the box against Man City. I think it was 5 out of 6 crosses he put in. So dangerous. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say I watch a lot of Marseille, if any at all. But again, chances might come at a premium. So we want that delivery into the box, and that's what Murphy brings. So I imagine it'll be unchanged and then Voldemort up top. I mean, the other worry, John, is, if we get to 50 minutes and it's not working up top, what does Eddie Howe do then? Because there's no Asula, there's no Johan Wissa. What does he do?
He does, you presume he does what he did on Sunday, which is bring Elanga on and play him centre forward. That's what he did against Man City when he brought him off, didn't he?
Which is far from ideal, but then if they've got Gordon back.
Absolutely. Or, of course, if he's on the bench, you could put Gordon centre forward.
Yeah.
To bring Voldemort off.
Yeah. None of them scenarios
are perfect.
But that is the hand Newcastle have been dealt with. I mean, we mentioned there, John, when we're talking about priorities, Newcastle United, are flying high in the Champions League, 6th in the table. You would reckon one more win would probably get you over the line.
Ideally, 1 win and 1 draw. Ideally, you want belt and braces, 1 win and 1 win in the draw.
So, forgetting everything we said about Everton maybe being the priority, and looking at that table and what's there to be achieved, I mean, if you're Eddie Howe, are you going for broke here? Are you saying let's go out and get this win and make it all but done in terms of the next phase?
Well, you go. I mean, Eddie is a very calm man, and that's one of his great pluses. He never gets too high and he never gets too low, and he sticks in the middle and he's well away. I mean, we should be capable of doing both things now. We should be capable. We ought to qualify, not be capable of. We ought to qualify from this position with 9 points already, etc., etc. In the early stages of the Champions League are much different. This is much different from when we were in 2 years ago. We were in a group of death and having to play sides home and away. Paris Saint-Germain home and away, AC Milan home and away, Borussia Dortmund home and away. That was tougher than this season is in the Champions League, isn't it? When we play Union, you play Bilbao and you play Benfica and even Marseille. It's not as tough now with the extra teams and the new format. It's not as tough now as it was the last time we were in. So we qualify for Europe, and we should still be able to go and turn our Premier League season around away from home and start taking maximum threes with the squad we've got at our disposal. Outside of centre forward, I agree with Wisa out, we're struggling there. But outside of centre forward, we should be able to shuffle the pack enough. But we've said that all season, of course, and we haven't done it away from home.
Yeah, and I mean, look, some people watching and listening to this will be screaming at us, John, with all this talk about bringing Dan Burn in for Lewis Hall and saying they're professional footballers. What you on about? They can't play 3 games in a week, but it is very, very tiring. But are we being too? I don't know what the right word is actually. Are we underestimating what they can do? Are we downplaying what they should be able to do in terms of turning out?
I think it's quite straightforward. Professional footballers ought to be able to play 3 games in a week. And nothing we've said is suggesting that that's not so. We are just saying that Livramento and Hall, can they play 3 games in a week, having been out with injury for so long? We're not saying can Bruno, can Tonali, can Voltemade, can the wingers? Of course they can, because they aren't coming back from injury. With that, if Wisa was playing, we would know he can't play 3 games in a week when he first comes back for the same reason. We're only talking about the fullbacks. The rest, of course, they can. If the fullbacks have been here all the time, I say we'll go and change on Wednesday, and unless there's on Tuesday, and unless there's a catastrophe, we can go and change it everything. Of course, they ought to be able to play 3 in a week. But whether Hall and Livramento can is a different kettle of fish. And if they do start, at some stage, there's a good chance against Marseille that they would have to come off. And we've got to think, of course, we can use Burn then. Botman can play left back, as he's a left-sided centre half. He can play left back at a push, etc., etc. Then you would have to use Murphy or somebody dropping back on the right. But yeah, we're not saying you can't play 3 games in a week. I'm not saying you can't play 3 games in a week. I'm saying can 2 fullbacks who've been out for so long play 3 games in a week?
Yeah, and I guess the other argument might be that even if they are already down to 85, 80%, you'd be better off starting them, getting the job done in the first half or the first hour, and then bringing in Dan Burn and Emil Kraft if he's back in the squad, or Jacob Murphy, whoever it might have to be at full back. So let us know in the comments your thoughts if indeed Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall aren't deemed fit enough for a full 90 minutes. Are you starting them? Or are you going to start Dan Burn and then bring them off the bench? Let us know in the comments your thoughts. John, all that remains to be done then is to get your prediction. How is this one going to go?
Well, there's a good old thought, isn't it? Well, if you could tell me which Newcastle United team's going to turn up, I'll tell you how it's going to go. But I'm not certain which Newcastle United team's going to turn up. I'm taking a 1-1 draw, and I never count that as sitting on a fence, because it's not sitting on a fence. You can either win, lose, or draw, and you're saying which one of those 3 they'll do. I've got a feeling that it could well be a 1-1 draw, which would not be a disaster by any means, because it would be that extra point, and then if we win our home game in the Champions League, we're virtually qualified. So it would be a more than decent result. And let's keep our way win for Everton. If we draw with Marseille and beat Everton, that'll have been a great week.
It certainly will have been. And when I asked you that question, my first thought was a 1-1 draw. I think a lot of people will look at the Champions League form though of Marseille and say this is a game which you should be winning. However, I'm sure their fans and their manager would be looking at their league form and saying at some point it's got to click for us in the Champions League, just like we're doing about the domestic league and the Champions League, and we have to hope
it's now or never for them. I mean, it's now on this game, unless they win this game, they're out.
Yeah.
So you're going to face a challenge. Because unless they win this one game, they can forget about the games to come with the results they already have. So they must win. So there will be a challenge. And I think a draw would be a good result for us. Of course, a win would be better, but a draw would be, if we can beat Man City, draw in Marseille and beat Everton, that would be some week, and I would settle for that.
I think many people would. So, yeah, I'm going to go for 1-1 draw, just like Gibbo is. John, thank you very much for popping on. You'll be back later in the week to preview the Everton game. Just a reminder, this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. Do click the link in the podcast description box for a discount offer on your NordVPN plan. You can stay safe while browsing on public Wi-Fi, so it's perfect if you are lucky enough to be following Newcastle United across Europe in the Champions League. Support the podcast at the same time. No risk with a 30-day money-back guarantee. One subscription, 10 devices. What's not to love? It's just a wonderful product. So do hit that link in the podcast description box. And myself and John will be back later in the week.